Welcome to Faro Aviators Educational. Today we are going to learn the first flight in family, the Wright brothers. It tends to remember those who make a lasting impact as larger-than-life figures, defined by their contribution, as well as the effects ripple and unfold after their fact. It's easy to forget that many of the people who shaped our world started out just like everyone else. They got into trouble in school. They struggled to find a direction in life. The Wright brothers were two such ordinary figures. They weren't born into wealth or power, they didn't have clear goals in life for a long time. They didn't even graduate from high school, because of circumstances beyond their control. But after their first flight on December 17, 1903, they set in motion a series of events and advancements that had a profound effect on their world. At first, no one believed the Wright brothers had developed an aircraft powered by an engine and controlled by human drivers. Yet just 38 years later, the Avro Lancaster, the plane that would become one of the Allies' most successful weapons during World War II. Before flight became a revolutionary development in travel, diplomacy, logistics, or warfare, it was the obsession of two brothers. Fueled by curiosity, and powered by the influence, love, and encouragement of an entire family. Truly understand Wilbur and Orville Wright? We're going to start with their parents. Because in another environment, or in another family, governed by other parents, it's entirely possible these two gentlemen would have been uninspired church janitors. The patriarch of the Wright family was Milton, or as he was known to his brethren, Bishop Wright. Born in 1828, he grew up working on his parents' Indiana farm, where he practiced his public speaking skills as he toiled away in the fields, reading every book he could find, and developing a firm belief in the evils of slavery. It wasn't until 1847 that he joined the Church of the United Brethren, rising quickly through the hierarchy in an organization that recognized his gift for giving sermons and relating to people in an unprecedented way. He was eventually made a circuit preacher, which means he traveled from church to church across the state. Their first and second sons, Roy Schleen and Lauren, came along in 1861 and 1862. It was another 5 years before Wilbur was born and, after the birth of twins who died in their infancy, Orville was welcomed into the family in 1871. 3 years later, the family was completed with the arrival of a sister, Catherine. For their entire lives, particularly Wilbur, Orville, and Catherine, remained close. The daily life of the Wright siblings was strict and disciplined, but it was also a warm, loving environment with parents who encouraged their children's individual talents. In some ways, Milton was staunchly conservative, but he was also very progressive in his views on things like the abolition of slavery and other social issues. He did meet his wife while she was studying for a literature degree from Hartsville College, and in the mid-19th century, that wasn't exactly normal for women. Milton continued to travel with his church job and was away from the family for long periods, but he made sure to stay active in their lives. He sent them regular letters, gave them complete access to his extensive library, and brought them gifts, including one that sparked an interest in Wilbur and Orville that wouldn't truly develop for many years. It was based on the design of a French aeronautical pioneer named Alphonse Pénaud, and it was essentially a rubber band attached to a propeller that would send the toy shooting up into the sky. Wilbur and Orville, then 11 and 7 years old, respectively, attempted to make their own, larger versions of the toy, and while they never quite pulled it off successfully, it did kickstart a fascination with machinery. They never forgot this gift, either. Decades later, they would write about how that one simple toy, that one small gift from a loving father, eventually guided the course of their entire adult lives. Their mother, too, had a huge impact on their love of all things mechanical. Susan Wright had grown up working alongside her father in his carriage shop, where she, too, nurtured a lifelong love of machines and gadgets. Wilbur and Orville grew up watching her design and build small appliances for use around the house. They also played with toys she had built for them. Years later, The Wright brothers would say that this toy sparked their interest in flight. Although both brothers attended high school, neither one graduated. In 1889, Orville built his own printing press and launched a newspaper with his brother Wilbur's help. The newspaper was not entirely successful, and in 1892 the brothers opened a shop selling and repairing bicycles. A few years later, in 1896, they even began building their own bicycles. Meanwhile, people all over the world were experimenting with flying machines. German aviator Otto Lilienthal made many successful flights using gliders, the first person ever to do so. He died when his glider crashed in 1896. That same year, American Samuel Langley succeeded in making short flights with an unmanned aircraft powered by a small steam engine. These two events inspired the Wright brothers, and they began seriously researching flying machines in 1899. They thought Otto Lilienthal had the right idea with his gliders, but his crash proved to them that a better way of steering them was needed. They carefully watched birds in flight, and noticed the way they tilted their wings to change direction in the air. Wilbur built a huge kite to test out the brothers' idea that warping, or twisting, its wings would allow them to steer, and it was successful. In 1900 Orville and Wilbur went to Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, to begin experimenting with gliders. They chose Kitty Hawk because it had strong, steady winds, as well as sandy beaches for softer landings. Many early tests of the glider were made while it was tethered by ropes like a kite, and with no one aboard. The glider did not perform as well as they had hoped it would, and the brothers returned home to Dayton, Ohio, to try again. In 1901, they returned to Kitty Hawk with a modified glider design and made dozens of flights with it. Although it traveled 400 feet or 122 meters on its longest flight, the glider was still not performing the way the Wright brothers had calculated it would. When they returned to Ohio, they built a wind tunnel and tested dozens of different wings to see which ones would lift the best. This hard work paid off. The glider they tested in 1902 performed much better than earlier models. They also added a movable rudder, which dramatically improved their ability to steer and control their glider. After hundreds of successful glides, they were sure they were ready to build a powered aircraft. In 1903 they built an aircraft they called the Wright Flyer, complete with propellers and a gasoline engine. On December 17, 1903, Orville Wright piloted the Wright Flyer for the first, historic flight. They had done it. The Wright brothers continued to improve their airplane. But despite their success they had difficulty persuading people they had invented anything worthwhile. Most people just didn't believe it. In 1908 they began to make public demonstrations of their airplanes both in Washington, D.C. and in France, and the Wright brothers immediately became world famous. They began to build and sell airplanes, creating a business called the Wright Company. They sold airplanes to the U.S. Army, created a flying school, and even made the first air cargo delivery in history. In 1912, Wilbur Wright became sick and died at the age of 45. He had never married, and had no children, once saying that he did not have time for both a wife and an airplane. With Wilbur gone, Orville took over management of their company, but he was not the businessman. In 1915, Orville sold the Wright Company. He retired from piloting and spent the next few decades serving on boards and committees such as the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics and the Aeronautical Chamber of Commerce. In 1944, more than 40 years after that first famous flight, Orville Wright had his last trip in an airplane, a Lockheed Constellation, a far cry from the original Wright Flyer. Orville died on January 30, 1948, of a heart attack. He was 76 years old. Like Wilbur, he had never married and he was buried in Dayton, Ohio, in the same plot as his brother. Today Orville and Wilbur Wright are remembered as pioneers of aviation and the inventors who made air travel possible. Aviators, thank you for watching Faro Aviator Educational. See you next Sunday.